I would like to introduce two exceptional human beings, Frantz Brent-Harris and, hello? Frantz is a Jamaican sculptor based in Toronto. His work is predominantly figurative and explores the complexities of outward projection, spectator perception of Black people. His work tries to portray in a tangible form the constant tensions of double consciousness and cognitive dissonance that corrupt the psyche of Black, African, and I know it's Caribbean, but I'm just going to turn the page. Caribbean people when encountering the barrage of negativity from white supremacist society. SA Smythe is a Black trans artist, critical theorist, educator, and student of abolition. They choreograph cartographies of Black belonging, integrating poetry, performance, light sculpture, sound composition, photography, and archival ephemera. Smythe's transmedia art has been featured in collaborative and solo exhibitions, installations, edited poetry collections, and festivals. Now they are based between Toronto, Rome, and unceded Tongva land. Now, before we dive into a glorious conversation, I'm just going to speak very briefly because I'm sure you're tired of hearing this out of my voice, although I am a Leo, so I have no problem with that. Okay. So let's just take one brief moment before we dive into this just to acknowledge and soak in the beautiful works that are surrounding us this afternoon. So Afrophilia is a love letter to Black people. This work is inspired by the generation of young Black people who are driving a shift in self-perception and changing our global consciousness of Blackness to appreciate its immense value, diversity, and beauty. By rejecting respectability politics and refusing to be identified with narratives of oppression, they can instead identify with the joy of being human. Black love as a revolutionary act. These sculptures in their vibrant orange and red reflect the energy and attitude of these revolutionary people, heroes, and that are deserving of this commemoration. This installation celebrates a culture of self-acceptance. And before we end, this exhibition is on until August 31st, 2023, here at the Toronto Sculpture Garden. Please come again. And we wanted to also send our immense thanks to the City of Toronto for supporting this exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Erica Russell. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. Excellent pronunciations, excellent information. Feel free to tell your friends, cousins, I know you got cousins, about Frantz's work here on until August 31st. And when you all take pictures in front of or with it as you tell your friends, #band. Frantz, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Okay. Little segue. Earlier we talked a bit about affecting kind of intimacy that you're used to when you're talking about your work. And so it's really wonderful that we're able to try to facilitate that space, so speak a little less formally, out here in the open in the middle of Toronto. We don't have that much time, so I want to dive in with a little bit more of your biography. Erica read out a bit, but I want you to talk a little bit about where you've come from, however you'd like to dive in. It's a big question.
So I was born in Jamaica, in 1970. And I came to Canada in 2003. And my primary work was a graphic designer. And then, so where I'm coming from, I want to talk about where I'm coming from in terms of sculpture. And what happened was that I came across a black Barbie at a Goodwill. And I'd never seen a black Barbie before in my life. So I bought this Barbie and I started collecting dolls. And in collecting dolls, I was like, I actually want a doll that looks more like the people around that grew up, like black Jamaican women. So I went to a sculptor studio to commission a doll to be made and discover their talent. And so I made my own doll, and I started sculpting, and I found it to be a very good way of keeping my sanity, because it was an effective way to express the kind of turmoil I was going through by living in Canada. Canada is a great place to live,
But
but
okay, there it is.
but there's certain things in the society which can affect you as a human being, and racism is one of them, and the white supremacy. And at the time, in 2003, there was a great level of denial about what Canada was. Now people are kind of like accepting the fact that Canada is a white supremacist and a lot of racism exists. But in 2003, they'll be like, no, we're cosmopolitan. There's no racism here. We didn't have slavery. And yeah, right?
Where's the camera?
So I was expressing a lot of my inner thoughts through the art. And my hook was to make it look beautiful and then sucker punch you with the actual message behind the art. And yeah.
No, that's I mean, that's incredible. It's funny. So before, I was waiting for the but after the pause because, as you know, haven't even lived here for 1 year. So thank you for the welcome. But also a pure Babylon thing this. So, but on the one hand, however, the way you're talking about 2003 and even certainly still today in parts of Ontario, of Canada, Europe very much is in that space. So I've lived in Italy before moving here, and very much the quote-unquote well-educated or middle-class, well-meaning Italian person loves to say that they didn't undertake colonialism, or they didn't do anything racist, they weren't a part of the Holocaust. These things are all false, by the way, for the tour guide on the left. Canada is a settler colonial enterprise, and we are all made to endure it. They're all right. Trying to bring him in. Trying to bring him into the art and reality. So, Frantz, you said casual. This is your fault.
Okay.
I appreciate the arc. You know, it's 20 years. You were then from Jamaica right before this, right? You came from Jamaica to Canada.
Jamaica,
I'm wondering, I didn't know about your background as a graphic designer, but I think it's interesting, this sort of aesthetic approach. And we'll talk a little bit about aesthetics, specifically beauty, in a minute. But moving from graphic design, aesthetic, effective, pleasing to particular audiences, moving into doll collecting, which also does a similar kind of work. It is for a certain kind of audience or under a certain white supremacist gaze. Even the black ones, who often have Eurocentric features, are used to. What else did you bring with you from where you're from? So again, not just geographically, but in terms of other parts of your experience, to bring into conversation with the phase of your work where you were working with dolls and the phase that came after.
Well, I think that one of the things that I missed was how beautiful people were in Jamaica. And, you know, it's like you come here and you understand how beautiful black people are because you see less of them here, and you really miss that. So I kind of make stuff that I want for myself, and I want to keep for myself. And I think that's one of the things I brought. Also, there is the self-acceptance bit. Jamaica is very homophobic. Here is not. I am a gay man. So coming here was also I came here as a refugee because of my sexual orientation. And so those are the aspects I brought here. I think that are shown in my work.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Another question before I get more into beauty comes up here in terms of your, talking about your sexuality and bringing in there's already a politics is what I'm also picking up, because we talked about your work being activated from the dolls phase, but even into sculpture, is activated by the white supremacy of the place that you found yourself in, and then thinking about how to hold on to some of that beauty that you knew otherwise. But there's also that aspect of sexuality that I'm interested in, or what life was for you in Jamaica, without rehearsing too much if you don't want to, in terms of how femininity plays in your work. Because we see some examples here, beyond what I would say is just the beautiful, but also thinking about the work with dolls, the work in some of your other phases of work that, I'm not sure if those are busts of feminized creatures, or the works I would say they're sort of mythical. And other work where you have the female body on display, bronze or otherwise. Can you talk a bit about how femininity has come into play for you, or why that's something that you return to in these different mediums?
Femininity. So I think realizing that the fact that women had to hold basically everybody down, because they had to love the children they had even under horrible circumstances. Mm-hmm. So I think femininity is a powerful thing. And I find it's kind of horrible that it's being so pushed down by people generally, by society, where it is like the most powerful part of society, I think. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you've talked about how misogyny is something that you reflect on in your work as well.
Yeah, and I think when I was doing my doll work, actually going into spaces where I saw women making stuff, because doll making is a feminine space. Mm. There are men that do it, but generally, and it was like this is strong, powerful energy, and it should be recognized as such.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. No, that's fantastic. I have. Oh, do I have to do it out loud from memory? So I want to go back to the point about beauty that we've been sort of circulating this whole while. You talked about how that is a really central aspect of your work. So I want to give you some time to get into that a little bit, what you mean by beauty. Obviously, we've talked about white supremacy, so ostensibly away from the white supremacist gaze, but what are the different contours, aspects of beauty that you're thinking about in your work, and how does it show up? And I wanted to read a quote, but I'm going to read it after I hear from you.
I think it's intrinsic. I think it's just in me. I don't know, genetically or whatever, that I just recognize it. I grew up in a beautiful country. I was surrounded by beautiful people. The colors are vibrant. Even like an open, abandoned lot becomes beautiful in a month in Jamaica because it rains and flowers grow. And so I think it's just something which I see, I feel, and I guess in my art I tried to recreate it because I missed it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah, I'm going to circle back to a part of this to see if we can get a little deeper before we open up to the audience, as there will be some time for that. So if you'd like to start formulating your questions. Because this is what I love about talking with other artists, with artists that have a material practice like you do, that there is a sort of push into the actual object so that you think, okay, well, I've got it. You know, we say we put it all on the table. It's like I've molded it with this clay, I've thought this thing through, and it sort of just came, you say, innately or naturally. But I also just want to say, well, at least for the audience, that there's something else, I think, at play that I witness in your work. So basically it's almost your job to say, it just sort of came to me and it looks like this, but actually this is, I think, the power of at least the scale of your work that allows us for public witness, is to say there actually is something. There's an eye, of course, but there also is some other itch, some other subconscious layer of attunement to the beautiful. One maybe obvious example to get this a bit more concrete is when we think about, you're saying, I came from a beautiful country, there are beautiful people, there are so many forces at play, like geographic and political, where we don't all say that. I mean, I'm also from Jamaica, so I do say that, and that's true, but like, you know what I mean? Like, people walking down the street, if they're born and raised from here, even generations back, indigenous people, or the white settlers and the people they coerced here as well, may say, well, it's a shithole, or this isn't, whatever, it's just a parking lot, right? There is something fantastical about the love in your work, is what I'm saying, that allows you to say, yeah, even a parking lot, because it rains and then something else will bloom. Do you know what I'm saying?
But it's true.
Yeah. But it's true, but the lens that you have that show up in your art, right? This lens about the aesthetic. You feel me?
Okay.
Because it's true, it's fact. Yes, the concrete, and then it grows and something blooms, and isn't it nice? Once we get to that place, that's a whole different aesthetic framework, because we don't all go in that direction. Some people are haters, Frantz. That's what I'm saying. So the quote that came to mind, so Toni Morrison, who's just an idol of mine, but I think about her work in relation to yours, that I've seen here, that you can still see, I think, at Band, and also the different mediums that you've operated in, which we'll talk about next, of beauty is a necessity. I'm going to read the full quote, but that's like the aphorism that is more popular. I think this is also maybe clarifying the point that I was just making about your eye and how you seem to have a real nuanced, I think, love, kindred, but the way that you describe that work is, I mean, it comes to me, this kind of innateness. Toni Morrison says, it's in an interview in the Paris Review, I think in the 80s, I think of beauty as an absolute necessity. I don't think it's a privilege or an indulgence. It's not even a quest. I think it's almost like knowledge, which is to say, it's what we were born for.
I agree with that.
So that was the link that I was making in your work. Beyond that level of innateness in terms of the eye or what draws you to making a certain object, building a certain image, reflecting on a certain memory, I'm wondering about the I don't want to say innateness, but the decisions that you make behind the specific materials that you use. You talked again, just very briefly, about coming from graphic design and moving towards doll collecting, which was, say, one medium. Where did you go from there, and what were the choices that you were making to build different kinds of work?
Also, I started collecting dolls, and then, as I said, I wanted to make my own that reflected what I considered beautiful. I did that first, but also sculpture was a good way to express how I was feeling about the society I was living in at the time. And I used it as a medium first to do that. So my first sculptures were very political. And
What do you mean by that?
well, they're about ugly subjects. They're about oppression, slavery, racism, murder. That's what they were about at first. And I think like the last 4 years has been a very, very difficult time for Black people in terms of we saw murders, we saw people getting slaughtered, we saw political forces actively oppressing people all over the world. And I reached a conclusion that it makes no sense to scream at white supremacy that Black people are human anymore, but we need to show things that tell ourselves that we are human. So we needed to embrace the beauty that is us and make things that show that and reflect that and put it out there, because it seems that showing art which shows our trauma was becoming entertainment as opposed to making people change their minds.
I love that. No,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Of course, I have like 1,000 ideas, but I'm trying to keep us to time. I wonder if you could circle back towards the end, right before we segue into Q&A, to think about the question of time. I'm really trying my best to not just like, don't say the word ontology, like just be, just like have a conversation. But, basically like being a human is a question of time. Like it's a question of history because we weren't all humans. So it's like a very flat way of collapsing some things that if you catch me after this in the corner, please allow me to talk more about it. But what I'm thinking of, the things that you listed when you were hailing your work as political in this phase, you could have just taken out the 4 years ago and I would have thought you were talking about that moment, right? So we're in a continuous wave of
Yeah.
of this reality. So
The,
do you know what I mean? How do you
the
think
wave
about
is
that?
continuous and it's still happening.
Yeah.
But for me personally, I'm not interested in preaching that to anybody anymore.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it makes sense. If you are not convinced that black people are human now, you will never be. So I'm not making art for you anymore.
A shift of the gaze. No, absolutely. That totally makes sense. And we are in like an intensification where you talk the last 4 years, I mean, for me as well, maybe for many of us, there's an intensification of the same kind of ongoing thing. So I totally agree with that. And I think it's really interesting and makes sense to me. The choice to move away from, right, we don't need to, that thing that you said about 2003, which again is yesterday or probably if you cross the street, we're not that bad or we didn't do these things. There's a kind of obliviousness that certain people have the privilege to hold. The decision to not operate under a white gaze is something that is also political. Basically, I'm saying the continuity that I'm also seeing is not just in this sort of history, like we're in this moment and you are making artistic decisions to look away, but I'm saying I'm seeing then a continuity in the political nature of your work.
Yeah.
Is that something am I sort of resonating with you on this? Like that was political because of the ugly subjects, and are you seeing, I guess, a political shift away from that white supremacist gaze in your work?
Yes, I am. And I'm doing it consciously. Because, as I said, I don't think it makes any sense to keep screaming that black people are human anymore. We're human. We don't need to convince you. If you're not convinced, well, you're lost. We're gorgeous. We're beautiful. So, yeah.
Yeah, I saw the twinkle in your eye with that. We're stunning. We're fierce. We're gorgeous. We're the moment. Would you segue for me? Maybe we'll, I think, skip a phase, perhaps, if my memory is serving correctly. But I want to segue to the beauty that we're sitting underneath at the moment.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how this work came about, Afrophilia?
It came out as a shift in my work. Basically, I was just like, I'm not making anything to speak to a different audience anymore. My work spoke to both audiences. One, black people got it, white people got it and then wanted to look away. I just wanted to leave, create stuff that made me and other people who were black feel better. And anybody onlooking, whatever they got out of it was up to them. But I wanted work that made me feel better and celebrated black people, the diaspora. And basically, I can't think of anything that's ugly about a black person. So I just sculpted black people. They are, to me, I have to confess, absolutely beautiful. And that's all I got to say. When I see a black person, I go like, wow, cheekbones, nose, face, lips, pizzazz, style, and they, and I understand why we are like this because we have a lot of weight that we're carrying, and we have learned to deal with it. But yeah, that's what it is about. Yeah. So, and there's also an element of my work, like, there's also the thing about a black man being a frightening entity. And I also want to address that, that black men have not, we're human, We're human like everybody else. So, like, I mean, I'm 6'4", everybody's scared of me, and I want to project also that, black men are just human and deserve flowers as well.
Deserve your flowers, that's right. Would you like to say any more about, we heard from the very start, Erica read out the description and the materiality, and we'll talk about maybe the materials next, but about the number of people, how you came to envision them together as sort of a Negro pantheon, also known as a pantheon because people were also black then.
Well, I'm going to be very honest, right? I want to do more, but I just didn't have the time. So the number is based, and money. I didn't have the time, and I didn't have enough money to do more.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's changing now, isn't it?
I hope so. But and
So what was the number that you envisioned? So basically what I'm hearing, without the still white supremacist structure of the art world and the disenfranchisement of talented artists, how many would you have made? And what was the vision for that number? How would you have comprised it?
It would have been around 20. Yeah, to fill the space up. I would have done that.
Sort of in a circle?
Yeah, a circle. Yeah. Like a garden of monuments that you could wander through.
Can't really name one for us, can we? On this land, anyway. I'm not sure,
Not
but
yet.
there might be historians in the room. Sort of even any kind of artwork, not regardless of the artist, but like more older busts or stone monuments that we see in parks or in the States. If the Confederates, here you have every other white. The categories, I don't have time. There's a lot of ranks of them, but just a space of fellowship, of memorializing beauty, of just sitting in the beautiful. I think something like that happening in Toronto, even just the little that I've seen, would be incredibly powerful, right? Because walking through the city, and I'm a part of the process, though I'm black, again, we could talk about this after, in terms of how gentrification operates and is racialized in a space. Pair condos, things are coming up, things are being raised, pits are being deepened, and it seems like, I wonder what you'd say, the Toronto that you arrived to has shifted in terms of the Toronto of today, and it almost feels urgent then because of that reality and the displacement of even more African, Black, Caribbean peoples, racialized peoples into the periphery, into the suburbs, out of the affordability of this space that we were fellowshipping in. What if we had an intentional space for appraising, regarding, sitting in Black beauty for its own sake?
That sounds like paradise, yeah. At least I think it would make a huge impact because, the people responding to my art, it has been amazing how people have responded to it. And it's through their response I see there's actually a need for people from different, from Black people to see themselves represented in the city. We know what the city is built on. It's built on indigenous blood and enslaved money from enslaved people. So everything that's enjoyed here happened because of something bad that happened to Black people. So our presence here has to be acknowledged, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no small accounting for the power of representation. And I think one of the most beautiful things that we can think of, not to make that the takeaway, but representation, but thinking about what you've been talking to us about, aesthetics, politics, humanity, beauty, these kinds of things get held, I think, within a kind of representation. Maybe we again go back to, Erica reading out the more nuanced land acknowledgement that I've heard living in the city. And I also work at a university, so, did SA just remember they were on camera? Yes, they did. They did remember that. Where were we? So, we're editing in post. That's fine. So what I want to say is like the representation, to go off of what Erica was reading from that land acknowledgement, is because there was a phrase towards the end, more than I guess symbolization, but an act. The kind of representation I'm talking about that I'm witnessing in your work is more of that. It's an act. It's not, okay, now there will just be, black people in a garden. Isn't that nice? We get to, yes, but what would it mean for the intentionality of the artist's work to have a black bust, black sculpture in a garden that other black people can see, and that being the primary aim? Is something that I'm seeing sort of coalesce in your work, which is also why, this is my read, they go together. Not just that they're placed here, but also in terms of what other people might want to collect or put in other garden spaces like this. Could you talk a little bit about how you see that in terms of the individual or collective sort of fellowshipping together? Thinking especially in terms of thinking about the gaze and then also the conversation around like acquisition, right? How do we get this in a place where the people that you intend to witness it can do that, and that often in the world that we're in looks like money?
I don't know how to do that actually. So I make the art.
Yeah.
And if you want, talk to me then, and if you have any ideas, because I would like this work to be permanent somewhere. And things are happening.
Yeah.
But that's my goal. My goal is to have as much people see this work as possible.
That makes sense. No, I mean, I hear you. Again, you have the artist's job, so maybe the dulcet sounds of my tones will carry, and people will sort of think alongside the artist with the necessity, and think of just the deep political, radical nature of this art, of this kind of idea, that the things that get acquired.
It shouldn't even be radical.
It shouldn't, but look at the Babylon world we're in, beloved.
I know.
It shouldn't be that people can fellowship in the streets without being antagonized and harassed. Right, the world that we're in this is what I'm saying. This is humility, a Jamaican with humility. Look, let's keep it on the record. The way that your art, it shouldn't be radical, and the way that which means the root, right? So it shouldn't be from a different kind of root that the world that we're in allows for this kind of beauty, this kind of nuance of just sitting in relation, fellowshipping with. The way that your art sort of instills these ideas as this day to day. As a black man, you give a black man his flowers, is not radical in, I think, your artistic vision, because you are on that plane, and what your work does, especially in fellowship, they're always with each other, is pull the rest of us into that world, or give those of us who want to be in that world a clearer path to getting there. And I think that is the beauty that I'm witnessing, and I really want to thank you for making this work, which is here on offer to witness and fellowship in without these white seats. The seats are the color until August 31st. I want to give a chance for just one or two questions for Frantz.
Thank you so much for the talk, and really talking about the beauty that you have here in the garden not being radical. I really resonate with that and the importance of representation for our community. I'm curious about the individual individual sculpts that you've done of Black people. How did you decide on what you wanted to represent in terms of the way that the different images come across, the hair, the jewelry, what went into those types of decisions?
Well, for this in particular?
Yes.
Well, this is basically, it's inspired by the people of Afro-punk. And if you ever see those pictures, you know exactly what I mean, because these people are embracing their beauty and they're adorning themselves. Also, some of it comes from, images that are taken by journalists of African people who also adorn themselves in this way. But I really wanted to make them as beautiful as possible, but also look very human, like someone you've seen. So I think those are the decisions I made. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
I have one follow-up question. I'm curious, like, there's a lot of strength in the way that they're the posturing and stuff, and there, I noticed that the expression on their faces, there's not like the smile that we may like to. None of them are like visibly smiling, right? So I'm curious about if that was like an intentional decision and how you came to like deciding upon how they would be expressing themselves.
I wanted the face to have a sense of mystery. Like they're looking outward and they're projecting. You're not knowing what they're thinking. So I wanted that. So they have a little mystery, like I'm seeing something way far than right here. I'm seeing something further. Yeah, so that's what I did.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So what is next for you? Thank you so much for talking with us about, the major arc and the different phases, but
Oh, there's one thing I have to say.
Yes.
They're not digitally sculpted. They're not digitally printed. So I just want to say that because people keep saying,
right.
are they printed? No, they're not.
and you do them yourself.
Yeah, and they're hand sculpted myself.
In fact, you learned how to sculpt so that you could create some of these visions.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
I know some stuff. Frantz Brent-Harris, quote, "Come see about me," end quote. So what is next for you? What can the people look forward to? What mediums are you playing with?
I'm still going to be figurative. I just came from Zimbabwe on a residency where I learned how to stone sculpt. So you might see some stone sculptures from me. But I'm really enjoying creating and sculpting, so just more work.
Yeah.
And hopefully better work too.
Yeah.
Like I hope my skills every time I work get better and better and better.
Yeah, I mean, you can already see it in the arc. We didn't have a lot of time, but hopefully, and undoubtedly, you will have more opportunities to speak about your work in a retrospective format, possibly. But, there is the different phases that maybe if people linger, we could talk about the like before deciding on the paint color and the different kinds of practice efforts you are making towards realizing what we see here is a really stunning vision. Thank you again for your work. Thank you all for sitting with us. Feel free to continue to check out the art. Thank you to the folks at Band. And thank you again.
And thank you everybody for coming.
All right.